This week on Quadriga, unity against terror. Can we turn the tide? In the wake of the terror attacks in Paris, politicians are looking for ways to fight extremism. EU states plan to share air passenger data, tighten border controls and boost cooperation between intelligence agencies. But will increased security be paid for with an erosion of freedoms? At the same time, people are asking how to stop young Muslims being drawn to fundamentalism. Education and job opportunities are surely part of the solution, but can such measures end jihadist violence? Across the world, people have turned out to demonstrate solidarity with the victims of the attacks and in support of free speech and democratic openness. Will that sense of unity be a lasting legacy of the attacks? Or will the killings ultimately increase mistrust of Islam in the West? Your host this week, Peter Craven.
And a very warm welcome from Berlin. How to move forward after last week's terrible events in France. That's what we're going to be discussing today here on Quadriga. And I've got three excellent guests to do so. Let me introduce them to you. Beginning with Amir Musawy. He is the Berlin correspondent of Al-Iraquia TV. He spent a lot of time in Europe. He knows his way around the Arab world too, and he's an expert on the Islamic State, which could be very useful indeed for today's discussion. Thanks so much for joining us today, Amir. Second, Daniel Gerlach is an all-round Middle East specialist. He's also the founder and editor-in-chief of Zenith, a German magazine focusing on politics, economics and culture in the Middle Eastern region. Daniel, thanks very much for coming along today. And Fabien Jobard is a political scientist at the Marc Bloch Institute here in Berlin. He can tell us all about the security measures that the authorities in France and Germany may or may not adopt in their battle against terrorism, and about the radicalization of young Muslims, especially in French prisons. Welcome, Fabien. Daniel Gerlach, I'd like to begin with you. We had the question in our introductory report already. Can the sense of unity we saw in Paris be a lasting legacy from these attacks on France?
No, I don't think so. I think we are seeing cycles, demonstrations of unity. We see these terror attacks, everybody's speechless, then, intelligence cooperation, security, sometimes even budgets are being boosted temporarily. Then the situation is calming down, and then eventually we see another of these attacks. The only thing that can be hoped for is to extend the time span between these attacks. But I think demonstrations of unity are useful, but if they are not followed by concrete measures on integration, security, also maybe foreign policy, then they will not be very sustainable. But I want to make clear that these terror attacks, they should not be connected like in a causal way somehow with any political mistakes that have been made in the past. Because I think the most dangerous thing is now to kind of posthumously justify these events by saying, okay, they are in the end a consequence of a failed integration or a failed whatever foreign policy. I think this should not be done. I think we should define this as a criminal act, and we should face it, and we should, fight it with the means of the rule of law, and not, as some politicians are always tempted after such attacks, declare a war on any kind of, institution, ideology, or whatever. I think we're very well advised not declaring war on anything, but facing this with the means of the rule of law.
Fabien Jobard, you're nodding here as you're listening to what Daniel has to say. You are yourself, of course, from France. And one of the themes of our discussions today is unity, preserving unity and using that to move forward. It's ironic, though, it seems to me, when I look to what is happening in France now, that we're not necessarily talking about groups of the French community who are united. We're talking about people who, well, we are, ironically, we're talking about people who are united in adversity, because we've got liberals under attack, we've got Muslims under attack, we've got Jews under attack. What on earth is going on there, and how can we make something of that?
Well, this is the question at the moment in France, but I'm not so sure the unity will be kept, in the coming month, because we already see some dispute over the laws that could be taken in order to fight fundamentalism or in order to fight terrorism in France, and we also have different positions towards the attitude with the Jewish community and with Israel in France, and the place also of the extreme right, which is now one of the most powerful party in France, is under discussion. And you've been certainly following the role of Marine Le Pen during the demonstrations, during the marches in Paris and other places. Should she be invited to join the other parties and the other politicians or not? Should she be put aside? So I don't think we are going to see united France and united opinions during the coming weeks. The main question is how to deal with a given part of the youth which is up to commit suicide in this kind of criminal action.
To kill themselves.
To kill themselves. Mm-hmm. This is, as Daniel puts it, put it right. Does it related to international terrorism, or is it related to criminal acts and a given state of despair among some part of the French youth? I would support the idea that what we have seen last week is a real French story, and almost only a French story.
When you say it's a real French story, a lot of people have been saying this past week or so that France, with these events, has lost its innocence, has lost its lightness in the way that the United States of America lost its innocence around 9/11, perhaps. Yeah.
Well, I'm not so sure that France was
well, let me just finish the question.
Way.
I'd like to ask you how far this goes back in French into France's history, into France's past.
The relationship between France and its immigration from Arab country is, from the beginning, from the starting point, an adversarial history. We had
a story of conflict.
A story of conflict. We had war within and against Algeria till 1962, and these children are a second or third generation of this immigration, so their family stories are marked by stories of war, stories of conflict with French authorities, either in Algeria or in France, and this has nothing to do with, for instance, the Turkish immigration in Germany. So the tension is the constant tension and adversity is a central aspect of this immigration. Of course, from the beginning of the 90s, there was a growing role played by the international politics, and specifically since 1991, since the first war in Iraq, in which France participated. And if France lost its innocence at what point, it was back to this date, 1991. But I again insist on the fact that these people, these three guys, were young boys from a French community with immigration, linked with immigration. They are very far from international politics, in my sense.
Sorry, can I jump in here? I disagree on the point of the time of radicalization and let's say the historical origins of this. If we look at these three bandits, who by the way are not classical jihadis, because As you said before, you know, they could have just like blown themselves up and, you know, declare themselves martyrs on in a video, in a preemptive video, let's say. But what they did, their behavior is somehow a mixture of, you know, jihadi tactics, but also what the French call grand banditisme, you know, grand banditism. They wanted to die, you know, perforated by police bullets. In a Butch Cassidy Hollywood style. This was the scenario. This was the mise en scène, the enactment, let's say, of their death. Secondly, I think we don't have to go too far back, because the radicalization of these people was post Second Iraq War, post the Bush's or the Allied forces invasion into Iraq in 2003. They are from a generation which the experts sometimes call the second generation of al-Qaida. Their radicalization, according to their own statements, but also to what researchers say who have met these people 10 years ago, started in 2004, 2005. They were like influenced by the images of coming out of Abu Ghraib, the feeling of injustice, Western dominance and imperialism in the Muslim world and so on. So I think we have to make, you know, it also clear that the radicalization of these people is not recent, nor is it a very old story. It's a very specific time in the period of the emergence of al-Qaida. And I think maybe we have lost grip on these people, because somehow also the security forces thought, okay, these people, they have grown up. They're not 20, 21 anymore. They're not these kids that we see, you know, on videos going to Syria and Iraq, pretending to fight for Islam there. It's another generation. It's a generation of people who we thought had grown up and who had their chance. And then all of a sudden they re-emerge, and we see, you know, they have spent their time in jail, they have spent their time drug smuggling, they've been in touch with criminal networks, acquiring weapons. Now there is a source saying that they might have bought these weapons in Belgium. We don't know. I think we have to look into these criminal structures, but also into the failed biographies of these people, and not only, you know, blame, let's say, the passionate colonial history or the political mistakes that have been done in the past with France and Algeria, because these things happen in Britain. These things even can happen in Germany. And Germany doesn't have, as you just said, doesn't have that kind of very specific colonial past.
I would disagree with Daniel, if you allow me. I think the radicalization became a kind of a culture, and a culture under the Muslim community, a part of Muslim community, that this culture began from 70s under the dictatorships of Arab and Muslim countries, and the United States dealt with part of what happened in Afghanistan, what the Mujahideen went to fight in Afghanistan. And I think this culture living and existing in the many generations, because the ground of it still existing, and the reasons of existing of this culture is still, for example, the undevelopment in the democratic process in Arab and Muslim countries. From one side, this is important for Arab and Muslim countries responsible for this. And second, this is the backup from the Western for the dictatorships in the past, in the 18 and 19. And of course, the mistakes of United States and the West in Iraq invasion and what happened, Abu Ghraib and etc. It's a package of mistakes became together, give a backup for this culture, and this culture existing not just in Arab countries, also in Europe.
When we talk specifically about what has been happening in France in the last week and a little bit more, how have you been explaining that to your viewers in Iraq and elsewhere? What has the narrative been that you've used to explain what's been happening there, and what have they been saying about what has been happening there?
Well, there is two main lines in the story about France for our viewers. The first point, the extremism, what we are also suffering from in Iraq. People are dying every day. And now what we are talking now, there's people in Iraq lost their life. And the second point, the limit between the freedom of speech and the respect of the religious figures or religious of the respect of other religion. The first main line is easy. this is extremism, everyone condemn them. But the second one is really quite difficult to explain the story. What's the meaning of freedom of speech, what we now in Iraq trying to practice it in our media. And the other part, how to respect the religious figures. And I think Germany also had to do with this point in the constitution, German constitution. There is a paragraph also respecting the religious figures, I think 66 or something like this. You should respect also the religious figures and also to keep the harmony in the society. I think this is really quite difficult, and many of my colleagues trying to telling the story from different way of a view for the community already suffering from the terrorism. It's quite difficult.
And here we're coming very close to the particular choice, to understanding why Charlie Hebdo was the target of this attack. Because this attack is different. It was different from other spectacular jihadi attacks which we have seen in the past. Why? Other jihadi attacks, especially the first generation of al-Qaida, were directed at strategic targets. They wanted to harm economy, military targets. The very classical, let's say, jihadi attack would have been political assassinations of heads of government, or, as we had seen in Egypt in the 1990s, spectacular terror attacks against tourists because they knew this would harm the economy of the country of the pharaoh which they are fighting. So the Charlie Hebdo attack was different because it puts, and this is also the very vicious aspect of it, it puts Muslims in a fundamental conflict of loyalty. You could hear from many Muslims in the world expressing regret and sorrow for what had happened, but you could also read between the lines that many Muslims in the world were like, well, we knew it would happen. This was about to happen, and it's very tragic. You know, they shouldn't have done this. They shouldn't have angered these people. They shouldn't have provoked them. They shouldn't have insulted the Prophet, because this is what happens when you insult the Prophet. So this conflict of loyalty among many Muslims, in Pakistan, in some African countries, in some Arab worlds, you had some isolated, I'd say, demonstrations in favor of the Charlie Hebdo attack. You know, of course, this makes the news sometimes, but I don't think this is the majority. And the majority of Muslims in the world were shocked by this, and they disagreed with what happened. But at the same time, al-Qaeda, the organization which is now at the moment in a big competition with the so-called Islamic State, because they're not the same group, was trying to get, you know, Muslim support in the world, to get credit, to somehow do something prestigious in which they would get the silent approval from Muslims in the world, which is not the case when you put a bomb into a metro station, and so you can be sure that at least, you know, out of 100 people, even in Paris, maybe 10 Muslims would die.
The al-Qaeda part in Yemen, which is classified according to the security circles, that's the most dangerous part of al-Qaeda. They are strategical, very good in the planning, and then also in they try to divide the Muslims with un-Muslims. They would like also to divide Muslims as community, to say this is the good side and the bad side. The Dar al-Islam, Dar al-Iman, as the house of Iman, of the believing, and the Kufr. The Dar al-Kufr is the other side, the
unbelievers. Yeah.
Unbelievers. And this is the point, and they came in the center of the point when they attack the newspaper. And when I expecting, also as a journalist, from my colleague journalists, to have the responsibility not to give them more reasons to do that, to do this in this way. For example, if I have a house burning, I'm not going to talk with my family about how we can build it again. I should to first keep all the Muslims calm, give the more message that we are unity. But what I'm looking now, after 2 days, that the newspaper republished the cartoons, and it is a kind of a new oil of the fire.
You want them to feel intimidated and to shut up? Or?
No, ever, never. But I please don't understand me that I would like to keep them silent and not to have the freedom of speech at all. But at least they have the responsibility in the timing of the republishing, in the way of the republishing, and also give the time for the politicians to give more sensitive, more message to.
Don't you think it was an act of reconciliation, this cartoon which they published? I think it was very.
I think it is. I think it is actually. They published a sketch of Muhammad, of the Prophet, who was just saying, "I deeply regret what happened last week in France," and it was not.
I understand that for Muslims, this is simply sacrilegious. This is blasphemy to
some of them. For some of them. If you read the newspapers and the interviews, which are numerous now in France with members of the so-called Muslim community in France, they all say nobody deserves to be killed for some sketches. And the last one, the one who was published yesterday, is really a reconciliating figure, a reconciliating representation of the Prophet.
Tout est pardonné. Everything is pardoned, forgiven. So
it was a strong message of reconciliation.
Indeed,
that's for, yeah.
this was not
and an ironic message.
This was not the case in 2011 when Charlie Hebdo again published some sketches of an offending image of Muhammad in really humiliated positions, but it was not the case yesterday. And considering that this sketch is an offense against the faith of Muslims or against the faith of believers, remember in the United States, they don't publish the sketches as well, because they estimate that it could offend every believer of every religion.
Let's just before we continue on this extremely important aspect of the debate about what's going on, we've got a short report with a contribution from a cartoonist in Egypt.
A cartoon satirizing the burning of allegedly blasphemous books in Egypt. Freedom of expression is worth defending, says cartoonist Amir, whose work appears in one of Egypt's best-known newspapers. He's not surprised that the new edition of Charlie Hebdo features a cartoon of Muhammad.
Terrorism is not clever. The perpetrators don't understand how satirists think. We are stubborn. It's a logical consequence that when satirists are threatened, they say to themselves, in that case, we'll really lay it on.
It's the view echoed elsewhere in the Arab world. This cartoon from Qatar shows a confrontation between a pencil and a missile, with the pencil of freedom winning. Amir says there is humour in Islam, but he also pokes fun at governments which misuse religious ideas. And he predicts Arabic cartoonists will continue to express their opinions.
Daniel Gerlach, magazine editor as you are, freedom of expression, full and unlimited, yes or no?
Yes and no. It's our own responsibility, and it's always difficult to say. I think satire. First of all, it's not me to judge, but I'm very happy that I'm not taking legal responsibility for what is to be published and what not. But I think it should be well intended. Everything should be well intended, and it should be directed to, not necessarily social integration, but you attack the strong. I think the idea of satire, as my personal opinion, I'm not an expert on this field, the idea of satire is directed against those that take themselves too importantly, the powerful. Okay. And I think this is what was also scary for the powerful. And the Arab world has a rich culture of cartoons, of satirical drawings and so on. A very old culture also. Some of the best, as we've seen in this report, some of the best cartoonists are Arabs. Algerians, for example. Wonderful what you see there. You can say, okay, this is kind of an imported tradition. But it's not limited there. Burkina Faso, Western Africa, you have a very, very rich culture of this. And I think we should always keep that in mind, that even though the Charlie Hebdo attack happened in the heart of France, in the heart of Western culture, Western intellectual culture, but the fight for freedom of expression is fought every day, and the front lines are elsewhere. The front lines are going through the Arab world, and they're going through the world, basically. And the people, journalists that get arrested, that get tortured, that get lashed, as in Saudi Arabia, they're part of our reality too.
Okay, very important points, very well made. An important contribution. I'd like to go back to what you were talking about earlier, Daniel. Fabien, we were talking about failed biographies. And we know that the authorities in France have said that there are as many as maybe 5,000 dangerous youngish men in the Muslim community who are being monitored at this point in time. A lot of failed biographies. How do we deal with that problem?
Oh. I think these failed biographies are really numerous. If you take the existence of the two brothers who committed the crimes at Charlie Hebdo, where did they grow up? They grew up in an orphanage. They were confronted to violence from the beginning, from the starting of their lives. These orphanages in France are quite violent places, and we have some testimonies of peers, who grew up in the same orphanage like them. And as soon as they were 18 years old, they were sent back to Paris with a ticket train and please live your life. And they were then alone there, and they were socialized in criminal and violent networks. So how far does the radicalization phase, does the confrontation or with so-called Islamic fundamentalists, how far does it play a role? This is a question which is very difficult to answer. These guys have been part of criminal networks, then they were sent to prison. One of them wanted to get into the army and to defend, the French flag. And as soon as he came out of prison, he was again trafficking some shoes or some drugs and so on. And they had religious or so-called religious commitments, and then they suddenly disappeared out of the screens of the security forces because they were not connected to these religious fundamentalists, and they committed the crime. What I am insisting on is that these are broken lives and incoherent lives. So it makes the job for security forces very difficult. And if you go now to France, there is a sense of unity, as you said, but there is a strong sense of powerlessness.
What does France need to do next to make the job of the security services easier?
Well, to have a closer look at the mosques, at what happens in prison, in schools.
Mosques already under the control and under the...
It's not about the mosques. What we see in these cases is they have already slipped away from the traditional religious authorities. In very few cases, you can really say that they have been radicalized in the mosque by their imams or whatever. It can happen that they gather and meet in mosques, and hang out in the corner over the Ramadan days and whatever. But usually, these people have already slipped away. And if we look at this, the guy who allegedly radicalized them, a certain Farid Benjedtou, who was a 21-year-old, ignorant about, religious teachings, but very charismatic. I mean, apparently he knew many surahs from the Quran by heart. He even, claimed himself of knowing the entire Quran by heart, of being a hafiz. But I don't think, he was. But, he had no idea about the Islamic religion and about interpretation, but he was charismatic and people followed him. But, this was not you wouldn't find this guy in a mosque anyway, so I think you have to look into other networks too.
Yeah, it makes the job for security forces really difficult because charismatic leaders in these cornerstone societies, there are many of them, and these charismatic leaders can lead the youth to get involved into football, to get involved into criminal activities, to get involved into fundamentalist activities, and how to go. Well, it's a tough job for security forces, since also they are now disconnected to these street corner societies we have in many places, in many towns, what we call in France banlieue and so on. The police have no difficulties to go into these neighborhoods
that has to change, because I mean, people
areas.
outside France for years and years and years now, for 20 years, have been hearing about the banlieue, effectively ghettos, and is something now going to happen in France? That has to be addressed. That social injustice has to be addressed.
Yeah, but not only addressed by security forces, but also by youth workers, social workers, and so on. The government now insists on the ability of social workers to let the authorities about what is exactly happening there. But we are also facing a budget question. Many places, many jobs in social work have been cut down in the course of the last 15 years. Even the riots we had in France 2005 on a nationwide scale, they were also provoked by the fact that there were no social workers anymore in these neighborhoods. And these social work, and you know, there is a way to describe police as a kind of social worker institution. And when you only have commando-style intervention forces on the one hand, who get into a neighborhood for crackdown interventions and then go out of the neighborhood, and no social worker anymore, what can you do? And this is not a question. That's why I was telling you that nothing can be done in the course of several weeks or months. This is a very long-lasting job, and that's why
they've been discussing this for years. You remember the riots in the banlieues at the times of I think Sarkozy was still Minister of Interior.
Yes.
Yes. And then there are big debates about it for a couple of weeks, for a couple of months. Then another problem emerges at the horizon, and you know, we have other priorities, or the French have other priorities. I think there is another aspect of this particular Frenchness of this story, which is France is a country with extremely high values of, you know, patriotism and high symbolism. So the French, the language of the French nation, La République, the national anthem, the flag, everything is very present. Symbols of national identity are very present. But we see that many people in France don't buy these symbols anymore. Because they just like discard it as pure symbolism. They say we are not part of this society. And you could hear in some of the suburbs of Paris where the minute of silence was not respected by some students in schools, who, you know, said like, you know, we don't identify with Charlie Hebdo, we don't identify with your president marching on the street, you know, with the tricolor, we don't identify with the Assemblée Nationale singing the French national anthem in Parliament. It's not our symbolism. And I think these things have to be dealt with, because French identity is very strong. It's a very attractive culture. And many Muslims have a success story in France, much more than in Germany, by the way. Muslim ministers.
And some of them were assassinated as well. Not only a Muslim police officer last week, but if you remember Mohamed Merah 2.5 years ago, he was the guy who killed Jewish children in a Jewish school in Toulouse. But he started with killing 2 Muslim or Arabic soldiers of the French army, you know, so that's one of the reasons why we can't really talk about a given Muslim community, you know.
You're talking about Sarkozy. I think in this time of Sarkozy, there is many mistakes have happened in the politics side. When Mr. Sarkozy said we find ourselves in a conflict with the cultures and so on. I think this gives a bad message for Arab countries and also for Muslims considering and belong. These young people, when we are in Iraq, investigate about suicide bombers from Europe country inside Iraq and looking where are they coming from and what are they. There is 3 general element in every European fighter in Iraq. Young, broken, no future, and they have a background of the immigrant background, 90% of them. And this is, back to your point, I think this is happened not just in France, it's happened also in Germany, in Denmark, and everywhere in European countries. And these 2 guys, or 3 guys, what did in France, I think we have thousands of them now in our society. And I hope that this will not escalate the situation that we will see in the future. Similar scenario, I hope not.
Let me just, there was a big protest march, or a vigil here in Berlin, in the heart of Berlin, earlier this week on Tuesday evening at the Brandenburg Gate in front of the French embassy. About 14,000 people took part. It was organised by the Muslim community here in Germany. I'd like to just get a couple of impressions from that gathering before we talk about that just a little bit more, the situation here in Germany.
We say to the religious extremists that we will not allow our faith to be abused and will not allow our society to be torn apart by those who want to trigger hatred and conflict.
I thank the Muslim organizations and all the Muslims who are here today to say, terror, not in our name. That is a patriotic yes to the country we all live in, to our country.
We shouldn't disrespect anyone who has different views, a different religion, different customs. We should respect them so long as they respect our laws.
We have to stand united against terrorism and not leave terrorists the upper hand, and not let them divide us.
Amir Musawy, what did that gathering for you tell us about the situation of the Muslim community, if such a thing actually exists here in Germany?
I very appreciate this initiative from the Muslims inside Germany, that they call for this demonstration, and it was really also embarrassing pictures that we saw. Nevertheless, I find there is the minimum of the Muslims community inside Germany went to this demonstration. The majority of...
There are 4 million Muslims in Germany, 14,000 people attended, and many of them were not Muslims.
But we saw that almost not half of them, maybe less than half of them, they are Muslims. I think the Muslims, they should stand up and really talk loudly, and also this is responsible of the Muslims.
What would you hope for them to say? Because a lot of people are talking about what we expect from the Muslim leaders, from the Muslim community. What can we realistically expect? What contribution?
Well, we are now, if we're talking about Muslim inside Europe, they are, the majority of them, they are moderate. And they are really open for the also cartoons, for critique, but they are also in this difficult dilemma. From one side, they should belong to the Holy Muhammad and protect him as a religious figure. From other side, they are also in a debate of the speech of freedom, and really they are in a difficult situation, and that's why, because of this, most of them, they do not attend this demonstration. Some of them, maybe they say, okay, as Daniel said, this is a tragedy, that's what's happened, and I think it's really very difficult, and now here come the politic, and to reorganize the society and give the model of the bring the harmonize in the society. I think this is, and what's the words of President Gauck, I think it is very important when he said, we are Germany, we are Deutschland all together. I think this is a very good sentence, and it will help us to refine ourselves again.
Daniel.
Yeah, I think the most important thing here is we should learn not to address Muslims as Muslims all the time. You know, in the 1970s, 1980s, we had the Turks. People were identified themselves as Turks. Nobody addressed them as Muslims. And I don't think we should go back to addressing them as Turks or whatever, you know, their nationality or their origins are. We should respect their Muslimness as part of their identity, but it's not their own identity. And I think the most important thing is what all Germans and Europeans have to understand: there is no such thing as an Islamization of Europe, or of Germany in particular. This is, as a matter of fact, does not exist. It's a pure propaganda term, and you know, let's fight this and confront this every time we hear it.
I want a quick take, however, on one. I mean, you're talking there about generalizations and the problem of generalizations. We had a survey recently here in Germany which suggested that 57% of people here, Germans, non-Muslims, feel threatened by Muslims in Germany. What do you make of that?
Well, I'm not sure if the terminology "feel threatened by Muslims" is correct. My understanding, my reading of it is they feel threatened by Islam as a concept. And I think this is a big difference. You know, I think we as journalists, as the media, have a responsibility here, of course, because my observation is that throughout the years, reporting on Islam and Muslim affairs has become, in general, much more detailed and much more nuanced. But every now and then we see a ridiculous magazine cover of Focus magazine, Cicero magazine, "How evil is Islam? Is Islam evil? 5 things about Islam," written by you know, virtual illiterate people who have no understanding and no knowledge about it. And I think we can do so much better. And the imagery is also important. Our magazine Zenith initiated a photo award in which throughout the years we want professionals and amateurs to contribute their views of Islam, also out of the Muslim community, to see the development of imagery and of the image of Islam in Germany. Every time I open a newspaper and I read a very detailed, very articulate report about Islam, the illustration comes with a woman wearing a niqab or a burqa. Okay, this is the image of Islam. If I see that picture, I don't have to read the article. And I think the picture editors, all the people that deal with illustrations, cartoonists, they are all also challenged to, you know, to readjust the way they depict Islam.
Okay, gentlemen, I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there. I can hear the music in the background. We've been discussing unity against terror. Can we turn the tide? And my impression, especially from Fabien, is that if we can turn the tide, it's going to take an awful long time. Amir, Fabien, Daniel, thank you very much for joining me today. Thank you for your analysis, your impressions, your ideas. I hope we've given you some food for thought at home. If you have enjoyed the show, come back to Quadriga next week. Until then, bye-bye and tschüss from Berlin.